let's talk about the Muslim Council of Britain and why they need to be banned. Now, a new policy exchange report has cast light on a lot of the Muslim Council of Britain's activities over the last couple of decades. And I have written about the Muslim Council of Britain and their ostensibly neutral front, the Centre for Media Monitoring, a number of times. I used to cover it over at Lotus Eaters when I was there, but I've also written about it repeatedly for Courage Media. I'm going to go through some of the details of this report, because you may not have had the time to read it. And the reason I'm doing so is because when this reaches the ears of people who work in parliamentary offices, hopefully some MPs, hopefully some establishment legacy conservatives in the press or in Westminster who are curious about what this new young right-wing trend is, stumble across my content and realize I shouldn't have been engaging with these people in good faith, hopefully we can present the case for stripping them of their charter status, which is warranted considering they have repeatedly been soft on prescribed terror groups, and banning them as a prescribed organisation. So, in the report, they note the Centre for Media Monitoring was established in 2018 as part of the Muslim Council of Britain to promote, quote, fair, accurate and responsible reporting of Muslims and Islam, and to, quote, help change the narrative about them. So, they are an ideology. They are not some sort of impartial arbiter of media fairness. They are an organisation dedicated to expunging the reputation of Islam writ large from criticism and insulating it from that criticism to make it impossible to discuss the deleterious effects, the inevitable downsides of importing Muslims en masse to a country and allowing them to practice their religion as is written. And for those who want to drive the divide between Islamists and Islam, I would simply ask you, was their Prophet Muhammad an Islamist? Because if Islamists are deriving their justification for their terrorism from the Quran itself, as the grooming gang perpetrators are, as the Muslim Brotherhood are, as many of the jihadists all of the jihadists who have committed terror attacks, the vast majority of terror attacks since the millennium in Britain, are they wrong and you're right? Or are we just hoping that all the Muslims we import from countries that we would not like to live in, because in the place they practice their beliefs, it turns into their country, are we just hoping they just don't read the Quran too seriously when they're here? Why are we banking our entire culture and immigration policy on a hope that people just sort of become a bit softer when they arrive? It's suicidal. Now, the report says of its hundreds of thousands of complaints about print articles and broadcast clips, the Centre for Media Monitoring has only issued or secured one successful newspaper correction, but of course it does have a powerful chilling effect on conversations around Islam. The Centre for Media Monitoring's founder and lead strategist is a chap called Mikard Versi. He is also a Muslim Council of Britain spokesperson and attended the Labour Muslim Network's official iftar in Parliament in 2025. They have also been amplified by Naz Shah, who was a frontbencher at the time. Naz Shah, who has recently come out and claimed herself to be the victim of her own decision to like and retweet an Owen Jones parody account that said, these abused girls in Rotherham should shut their mouths for the sake of diversity, or for the good of diversity. You're not the victim, Naz. And you said it was a mistake. How did you go through the steps of manually liking and then pressing twice to retweet it rather than quote retweet it? I'm asking that question because an explanation still has not been provided. Instead, you just claimed you were the victim. So, I mean, I'm just saying, none of my beliefs would ever lead me to dismiss victims of the worst child abuse scandal in British history. So, what made you look at that and then like it and then retweet it, even by accident? Question not been answered. In 2020, the Centre for Media Monitoring's Amanda Morris said she wished there were a law against mocking Islam, and when she was speaking about Charlie Hebdo, who of course 4 of their cartoonists were murdered in an attack on their French studio after they picted their Prophet Muhammad, which is of course not allowed in Islam, Morris said, I don't think there's just purely criticism, I think that could be considered incitement. Basically, they were wearing short skirts, so they deserved it. Morris previously worked for MEND, which is an Islamic activist group, which Baroness Sayeeda Vorsi called, although not illegal, definitely a liberal. She was their national head of women's engagement and chair of MEND's Cardiff working group. None of these organisations should be in the country, they shouldn't be allowed, they should be banned. In June 2025, the BBC's Director of News Content, Richard Burgess, spoke at a Centre for Media Monitoring meeting in Parliament, which I suppose explains their softness around Hamas. And he spoke alongside 2 Labour MPs, so again, even though the Muslim Council of Britain are meant to be subject to a ban on engaging with Whitehall, Labour MPs are liaising with the Centre for Media Monitoring as if they are a legitimate organisation. And the report was criticising the BBC's coverage of the Israel and Hamas war. The report said the BBC shouldn't refer to the Gaza Ministry of Health, which is run by Hamas, as Hamas run, even though it is. And they also said that sympathetic articles with emotive, humanizing, or personal stories of Palestinians appeared only twice as often as those for Israelis. Bear in mind, the BBC did a documentary on Hamas and the Israel-Palestine conflict that was narrated by the son of, I think it was the Hamas Minister for Agriculture, and they didn't disclose that. So the idea that the BBC is biased towards Israel, or at least towards Britain would be nice, is ludicrous. They are just pushing at the open door of liberalism to use your liberal white guilt as a Trojan horse to push through Islamism. That's all they're doing. The Centre for Media Monitoring has also run multiple focus groups and workshops to the BBC since 2019 and held meetings with ITNs, the parent body of ITV, STV, News UK, so the Times, the Sun, Sunday Times, Channel 4, Sky, LBC, The Guardian, The Mail, The Mirror, and delivered masterclasses to students at Middlesex, City, Leeds Trinity, and Goldsmiths universities. They have their influence, that they are peddling their influence in many of Britain's elite institutions. And so, these institutions, if they feel inclined, or at least mandated by internal diversity, equity, and inclusion policies to liaise with this group, they will inevitably adopt its values and framing, and this will contaminate their news coverage, and so you will be fed the Islamic line on things. This might help explain why the BBC once referred to Islamic converts as Islamic reverts, with the premise being that we are all Islamic, that's man's natural state, and that kafars, infidels, unbelievers, those who reject the Islamic faith, should revert to Islam because it's man's natural state, rather than convert. They should come back to the faith, as it were. The BBC put that out and then quietly issued a correction after they were criticised. Now, the Centre for Media Monitoring is running clear cover for Hamas, who are a proscribed terrorist group. They are softening the British media's approach to it, and therefore influencing the minds of people who know better. Why are they allowed, via the Muslim Council of Britain, to have charity status? Because the Muslim Council of Britain's charitable organisation, where it gets a lot of its money, including from the Department of Work and Pensions, thanks to Nick Timothy's investigation into this, why are they allowed charitable status to then funnel all of that money into the Centre for Media Monitoring? And the Centre for Media Monitoring has only reported income from that charitable trust. So it's just a clear pipeline for additional government benefits accrued to the Muslim Council of Britain to then feed into its hatchet organisation, much like Hope Not Hate does the same. And Hope Not Hate are now being, well, the Charity Committee and the Commission are now urged to be investigating Hope Not Hate after a lot of reporting by, yes, I will say, yours truly, but also Charlotte Gill, Charlie Peters, Stephen Edgington, and eventually a brand new piece that makes a sort of definitive case against Hope Not Hate, having broken multiple laws but seeming to be insulated from prosecution. Perhaps it's because Lord Hermer, the current Attorney General, used to work for Searchlight magazine, which was the spawn point for Hope Not Hate to create itself as a splinter group, because Nick Lowles, the CEO of Hope Not Hate, used to work for Searchlight alongside Lord Herbert. And it's also possibly because, as I spoke to a different contact than I mentioned at the start of the show about this, after new laws about undercover policing were brought in, I think under Theresa May, the police began to outsource, also as part of their mandate to engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion and community cohesion exercises per the Equality Act. The police began to outsource their undercover policing operations to third-party groups like Hope Not Hate, which might explain why Harry Shapman used that fraudulent passport to entrap subjects of their documentary Undercover Exposing Far Right, and despite being reported to the police by multiple people, nothing came of it. So, yep, all of that, same goes to the Muslim Council of Britain. Why do they have charitable status? Why are they allowed? Why are they not prescribed as a group that is aiding and abetting terrorist activity in this country, or at least lobbying to soften the media, public perception, and politicians' stance against Islamism, jihadists, and terrorist groups? So, the Centre for Media Monitoring claims to be instrumental in developing the IPSO guidance on the reporting of Muslims and Islam. Many parts of the guidance that the report looks at closely reflect the Centre for Media Monitoring's preoccupations in its reports. IPSO is the independent press regulator. This would explain why in 2023, when Suella Braverman, then Home Secretary, wrote in the Mail that grooming gangs are predominantly comprised of Pakistani Muslim male perpetrators, the Muslim Council of Britain, via the Centre for Media Monitoring, lodged a complaint to IPSO against the Mail, and even though IPSO didn't uphold the complaint, this exercised enough pressure on the Mail to cave and issue a correction in their article against Braverman, citing the 2020 Home Office report, which now, Dame Louise Casey's audit has definitively said was a cover-up. The report omitted crucial data about the ethnicity of grooming gang perpetrators to come to the false conclusion that a majority of perpetrators are white males. That might well be the case of all crimes of child abuse, but this specific type of child exploitation and grooming, especially with the religious and racial motivation, is overwhelmingly Pakistani and Muslim men. And Suella Braverman is now pursuing an apology from IPSO on behalf of the victims, not on behalf of herself, because this again contributed to the climate of cover-up around the greatest child abuse scandal in British history, and the Muslim Council of Britain and Centre for Media Monitoring were responsible for contributing to this plan. So again, why are they allowed? The Muslim Council of Britain and Centre for Media Monitoring defines Islamism as, quote, an example of a neutral understanding of the term could be a peaceful, democratic, constitutional, and moderate political activism based on Muslim ideology. Sorry, read that again. Islamism could be understood as a peaceful, democratic, constitutional, and moderate political activism based on Muslim ideology. So the Islamic capture of your state is entirely peaceful and democratic. So they are just expanding and distorting the definition of Islamism to obscure actual Islamist and jihadist activity in this country. They are an organization that is engaging in subterfuge that is putting lives at risk. Again, why are they allowed? They also recommend the avoidance of the term as a descriptor altogether. They say, we request journalists not to use Islamic extremism in news output as it is not a neutral term, but one that makes a direct link between Islam, the religion, and the ideology of extremism. The term Muslim extremist is also problematic, as although this does not demonize the entire religion of Islam, instead laying blame at the door of an individual, it implies that the Muslimness of the individual is relevant. So you can see this sort of train of thought. It's also present in Prevent's guidance that is insistent that Islamism has nothing to do with Islam. Meanwhile, if you're a cultural nationalist and concerned about the impact of demographic and thereby cultural and economic change on your country, you're literally a right-wing terrorist. You can see where this line of logic is unfolding. They are trying to decouple Islam from the terror attacks committed in the name of Islam by people that, read the Quran and cited it. Again, insidious gaslighting sponsored by the state because they are still the beneficiaries of charitable status, and other organizations that have attempted to be charities. Here's an example. I used to be part of the British Conservation Alliance, which was a market environmentalist group that tried to tell the government they were spending money on environmental policies in a bad way. Sort of a sensible policy body. We were blocked from being allowed to have charitable status for some time because one of our members had written an article criticizing the tactics of Extinction Rebellion. Bear in mind, the Muslim Council of Britain, hope not hate, the Marxist library, they all had charitable status. So it's not about being apolitical, it is about activists in civil service believing their ideas to be neutral, as a water in which we all swim, and so any contradiction of those ideas is contravention to equality, diversity, and inclusion, and therefore should be outlawed, prohibited, and prescribed. We need to flip that. We need to totally invert that, because our ideas are sensible, they sustain the country, they are the givens upon which common law, parliamentary sovereignty, the dignity of the innocent human person rest. And we should be championing those and excluding and banning those which are to the opposite, which place our way of life under existential threat. That includes the Muslim Council of Britain. It also argues the Centre for Media Monitoring, the term moderate Muslim or moderate Islam should be avoided, because this is a political determination which forces Muslims living in the West to pick a side between their religious and political identities and to conform with the version of Islam that has been sanctioned by the state. The only part they're correct on that is that there are operatives within the British state who try to present a compromised version of Islam, like Dame Sarah Khan with her Yin Jack hijab, which is sponsored by the Home Office, and then broadcast in front cover of The Sun in 2014 when Annan Henning was decapitated by ISIS. There is the idea that there is a state-sponsored contained version of Islam, but this still, according to William Shawcross in his 2023 review of Prevent, gives succor to the Islamists in our midst because it creates a direct pipeline between operatives in the Home Office who are sympathetic to Islamic activism being influenced by self-appointed community cohesion representatives in groups like the Muslim Council of Britain, who then come and then launder the ideas of jihadist groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir or even Hamas through their activism to civil servants, which then makes it through to government guidance and policy. Or the way that the BBC report on things. Also, the Centre for Media Monitoring's entry on jihad states, terror attack cannot and should not be described as unqualified acts of jihad, given they breach the rules of jihad. Not true! Which is why I brought Tom Holland's book, In the Shadow of the Sword here. Tom has a interesting passage on the genesis of the term jihad, and yes, in early Quran verses, which are in a sort of hiddledy-piddledy order, it does refer to an internal religious struggle between sin and righteousness. But, as he writes later about the scholar Ibn al-Mubarak, he says, "Were you to see us," Mubarak lectured, "you would realize your worship is mere play. For you, the fragrance of spices, but for us, the fragrance of dust and dirt and blood flowing down our necks, which is altogether more pleasant. And certainly 100 years and more after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, evidence for this robust approach to the essentials of Islamic worship was coming to be marshalled in impressive quantities. Ibn al-Mubarak himself compiled an entire book of hadiths devoted to the single topic, jihad. Other scholars, turning to the Quran and finding themselves puzzled by the alteration of passages that urged perpetual warfare, with others that seemed to urge the precise opposite, sought to organize the verses in what they trusted was a chronological manner, with one in particular targeted originally at treaty breaking, this is mushrikun, being placed right at the end of the Prophet's life. Kill them, besiege them, seize them, wait for them at every lookout post, maxims with an obvious value for those with a taste for fighting Romans. It was therefore crucial for such scholars to establish that the verse was indeed revealed to the Prophet late in his career, and so superseding earlier verses, for only so could it plausibly be demonstrated to have superseded other, less bellicose passages. As a result, it was not only hadith collections that started to be shaped by the martial enthusiasms of the ulama, but details of the Prophet's biography. For scholars such as Ibn al-Mubarak, the stakes could have hardly been higher. Fail to demonstrate they were following Muhammad's example, and not only their increasingly complex doctrine of jihad, but all their suffering amidst the killing fields of Cilicia would effectively rank as worthless. Render the Prophet satisfying in their own image, however, and the prize would be a truly fabulous one. Not only would the past of Islam be theirs, its future would be as well. So Holland is making the case that the hadiths were disingenuously reorganized to manufacture religious righteousness for the warmongering desires of later Islamic caliphate founders. However, even as this is the case, if you're a doctrinaire Muslim and you are reading this, and let's say you are less skeptical about the motivations of those acting on behalf of the Prophet's final revelations, and this is the final revelation, it is meant to be the literal word of Allah transcribed by the Prophet and his witnesses, then you are going to take jihad to mean the bloody warfare that will be waged against unbelievers, especially on Judgment Day when the rocks and the trees come alive and announce where Jews are so you can come and kill them, in order to establish the caliphate on behalf of the final revelation of Islam, Allah. So the idea that jihad is not violent is a lie. And presumably the Muslim Council of Britain have read their own books and their own history, so they would know this, so why are they misrepresenting it? Is it to unilaterally disarm us against the influence, the idea laundering of Islamist activism through British politics? They also explicitly state press regulators must discourage insults against Islam, and the media should not be allowed to accuse authorities of failing to investigate wrongdoing because perpetrators are Muslim, as in Rotherham, Rochdale, and Telford and the like. It describes the reporting of grooming gangs as based on shoddy underpinnings. In 2018, it complained a Mail on Sunday article calling the British ISIS executioner, Mohammed Emwazi, that's Jihadi John, a terrorist among other 19 terrorists because, and they say it was misleading, because he was never convicted. Yeah, Jihadi John is definitely a terrorist. Definitely. So they don't think he should be called a terrorist. The Centre for Media Monitoring defended an imam at a mosque attempted by the Manchester Arena bomber who was accused by the BBC of preaching a sermon calling for armed jihad. So not just, eternal spiritual struggle. No, the kind of violent jihad that jihad actually means, according to Islamic history and the Hadith. They also attacked the BBC for describing the Westminster terror attacker Khalid Massoud, an Islamic extremist known to security services, as an Islamic extremist claiming this was anti-Muslim language. And then they also kept accusing the late Times columnist Andrew Norfolk, who exposed the grooming gang scandal to wider public attention, I think it was in 2011, of scapegoating Muslims and of Islamophobia. They've also repeatedly accused Charlie Peters of GD News of being an activist journalist, and they described in their recent 2024 report saying that GB News has an unhealthy obsession with Muslims. They described the grooming gangs as so-called grooming gangs. So they are just grooming gang denialists. Their new Secretary General, Wajid Akhtar, also claimed in his inaugural speech that discourse around grooming gangs is unfairly targeting Muslims as basically a conspiracy theory. They said that, of course, grooming gangs and any sexual violence committed against anyone is wrong and is not according to the religion of Islam. Maybe they missed out the passage of what the right hand possesses. Spoiler, it's sex slaves, which are the booty adorned to Muhammad and his followers by Allah. But then to go and accuse those of talking about the specific religious and racial motivations of Pakistani grooming gangs, which have been documented by survivors and the perpetrators themselves who have shouted Allahu Akbar when they've been sentenced and let out of court, or the Rochdale perpetrator who shouted that the Pakistanis are the supreme race and British have destroyed Muslims, so the young girls deserve everything they get. To try and deny this is just blatant gaslighting to try and protect the reputation of Islam from any damage suffered because its followers keep doing violence to the British host majority populations. It also claims that moderate Muslims abandon religious identities for a version of Islam that has been sanctioned by the state, and that they may even be liberals or government spies. So lots of very conspiratorial thinking for there. As far as Muslim Council Britain goes, and this is the case for banning them, they were subject to a ban on white-collar engagement after 2009, when their former director had his name appear as a co-signatory on the Istanbul Declaration, which was interpreted as a call to fire upon British naval vessels were they in the waters around Palestine. This was Dr. Dawud Abdullah. And the Istanbul Declaration said to carry on with the jihad and resistance against the occupier until the liberation of all Palestine, and the sending of foreign warships into Muslim waters claiming to control the borders and prevent the smuggling of arms to Gaza is a declaration of war which must be rejected and fought by all ways and means. Even though the Muslim Council of Britain denied this, the text is pretty clear. Also, under Abdullah, they led a 6-year boycott of Holocaust Memorial Day, which isn't great, and they also were a little bit slow on the uptake to condemning the Hamas attacks on October the 7th, but were very eager to condemn the Israeli response to the Hamas attacks. In 2015, a British government report, by the way, said that the Muslim Council of Britain was influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood. Quote, for some years, the Muslim Brotherhood played an important role in establishing and then running the Muslim Council of Britain. And then also in 2001, before 9/11, the Muslim Council of Britain opposed UK government ban on Al-Qaeda, including 21 other organisations. And they said in 2020, they opposed a ban on Amjad Chowdhury's Al-Madroon, which is linked to a majority of terror attacks committed in Britain, including the 2017 London bridge attack, and I believe the 7/7 bombings, actually, because one of the training camp organisers was linked to Al-Madroon. In 2009 as well, the Blair and Brown government, in a government report, found that 80% of Britain-trained imams were Deobandi, so part of the Pakistani anti-colonial, anti-British political splinter sect, and the Muslim Council of Britain itself was helping train these clerics. They also were recommending, as late as 2023, clerics to act as chaplains in the armed forces. Bear in mind that more Muslims joined ISIS than joined the British Army. And then this same report in 2009 also alleged that the Muslim Council of Britain was established and largely dominated by a jihadist group that will struggle to pronounce, but will attempt to, Jamaat-e-Islami, and this was a focus of controversy for its linkages to Islamist movements. So we've got a repeated pattern here of links to the likes of Hizb ut-Tahrir by their new General Secretary, Wajid Akhtar, who urged British Muslims to raise generation of Saladin after Saladin after Saladin until we don't know what to do, which seems to be a crusade-style call for violence against the British host majority population and its politics. And Akhtar was involved in the Muslim vote, which was connected to Hizb ut-Tahrir, which had now been prescribed. They'd been connected, or at least running defense for, the likes of Al-Qaeda and Al-Majroon and Hamas. They were engaged in the iconoclastic campaign against the Lady of Heaven in British cinema, similar to the sort of Batley Grammar School teacher who was intimidated into hiding. They have defended all of these protests, of course. They have been involved in intimidation tactics against people reporting on the grooming gangs and blasphemy laws and vigilante violence by Muslim militias during last summer's post-Southport massacre riots. They accused people reporting on these stories as being obsessed with Muslims and trying to endanger their lives and responsible for a rise in hate crimes. They have endorsed the Islamophobia blasphemy law that is being currently proposed by the Labour government under Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, involving Qari Sin, by the way, the imam of a Leeds mosque, who The Guardian consulted the other day on the anniversary of 7/7, who said that British Muslims were actually the ones most affected by 7/7, not the people blown up on the tube whose lives were ended and ruined. Qari Sin, by the way, is a trustee of Hope Not Hate, and also participated in or endorsed the Lady of Heaven protests, which led to him being deselected as an Islamophobia advisor by Michael Gove. Why there was an Islamophobia board in the first place? Something the Conservatives ought to answer, but they haven't yet. The Muslim Council of Britain supported the Islamophobia definition by the all-party parliamentary group of British Muslims, for whom Hope Not Hate conducted the polling. And now the Muslim Council of Britain are urging all of their members to en masse reply to the public consultation. I will link the public consultation here on my Substack, etc., because Nick Timothy, again, has been doing great work raising the alarm about this public consultation being a farce, a total whitewash that only activists will respond to and tilt the results towards manufacturing the impression there's a sort of rife and all pervasive bigotry towards Muslims in this country, when in fact we have been far too tolerant of the jihadists and Islamists and their apologists in our midst. The problem is, with the policy change report that I've been reading from, they don't advise that the government prescribe the Muslim Council of Britain and its members, and they don't advise that they are at least strict charitable status. We should absolutely do that. We should not be giving a single penny to mosques, to Muslim organizations. We should not be allowing people to run cover for jihadists in this country to soft pedal the reputation of Hamas, Hizb ut-Tahrir, Al-Qaeda, Al-Majroon, or any other Islamist group. We should not be giving them any succor. We are a Christian country. Sharia law is completely incompatible in its principles with common law. We should not allow a parallel legal system or parallel religion or ethnic enclaves to be established in our country. We should take a hard line on this. The question is, who is willing to do so? And as I've said before, I will not vote for a communist candidate, and therefore I will also not vote for a Muslim candidate. And I think there's a lot of people that are waking up to this idea that we should not allow a parallel moral and political system to take root in our country. The question is, when will politicians have the guts to say the same thing? I think to bring our country back from the precipice of civil conflict, which is currently being stoked by organizations like the Muslim Council of Britain, they will have to have the courage to do so.